Welcome, everyone. So thank you so much for being here with us. My name is Khoo, and my pronouns are she and her. I'm a Brazilian and Latina woman with light skin and brown hair, wearing a black top and a beige sports coat. I'm an assistant professor at FGV Law School, Rio de Janeiro, and a postdoctoral researcher at the UVA Digital Technology for Democracy Lab, our DTD lab. Together with my colleague Jess Rea, an assistant professor of data science and public policy, and also a 2025 Carnegie Fellow, and co-lead at the Digital Technology for Democracy Lab at the University of Virginia, we co-organized this Gender in Tech Talk series to explore how gender shapes and is shaped by technologies with perspectives from the global majority. Our aim is to bring together scholars, practitioners, and advocates to explore how our work can contribute to advancing democracy and human rights. So today we host our 10th session titled Possible AI Futures, exploring the concepts of artificial intelligence from a global and critical perspective. Today is the last session of our series, so we are deeply grateful for each one of you, the community that we built around these monthly webinars. Later this year, we are going to publish the report of the series and share it all with you. So for today's webinar, we recognize that English is not the first language for many of us, so please feel free to ask questions in Portuguese, Spanish, or French. We'll do our best to translate them. You can use the Q&A feature that is located at the bottom of the screen to ask questions, and also automatic closed captions are available. You've already turned them on. The recording will be available on the UVA DTD Lab on YouTube's channel in the next couple of days. Thank you all again for being here. Next, we'll hear from Professor Jess Rea, who will moderate this conversation today. Thank you so much, Jess. Please go on. Thank you.
Hi, thanks, Yasmin. Hi, everyone. Welcome again, and thanks so much for being here with us. As Yasmin said, my name is Jess. My pronouns are they, them, and I'm a Brazilian person with light skin and red hair, wearing black glasses and a black shirt. And I work here at UVA. I've been co-leading the GTD lab for a couple of years now. It's a pleasure to moderate today's conversation on possible AI futures, and we hope to explore ways to guarantee social participation, the design, deployment, evaluation of AI systems, how AI design and regulation have been impacting gender minorities, and what kind of responses are needed from us. We also ask how people can regain control over these technologies. And one of the main questions is an ethical responsible AI even a possibility? And if so, do we have any examples of bottom-up and more inclusive AI development and deployment as well? And so we are thrilled to welcome two brilliant speakers today. We have Cynthia Khoo and Ploipailin, whose work help us rethink the possibilities of digital technologies in a way that could positively serve democracy and public interest, two topics that are very interested here. So Cynthia Khoo is the founder of and principal lawyer at Tekhnos Law, where she specializes in technology and human rights, focusing on how digital and emerging technologies impact the privacy, equality, and free expression rights of historically marginalized groups. And she's also a senior fellow at the Citizen Lab in the Monk School of Global Affairs and Ploipailin, University of Toronto, and sits on the board of directors of the Open Privacy Research Society. Thanks for being here. Ploipailin is an AI researcher, educator, and organizer interested in making AI work for the rest of us. And Ploy is the co-founder of AIxDesign, leads do-it-yourself and AI working groups at the New Inc., and is a lecturer at the University of the Arts London, Central Saint Martin, and the Creative Computing Institute in London. Thanks for being here today as well. So before we begin, just a few reminders. Please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. Write your questions. We'll make sure we'll help translate to the best of our capacities here. In the recording will be available in a few days. So we can start. Thanks again for joining us. So we can begin with Cynthia Khoo's presentation, if that's okay. So Cynthia, thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I'm going to take a moment just to share my slides. Okay, can everybody see this?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming to this talk. I mentioned earlier to the organizers that I've been in a more straightforward, blunt mood lately when it comes to talking about AI issues. And so the approach I took to this presentation is kind of just taking a step back and not necessarily defaulting to the frame of AI is here to stay, so what should we do with it? But to go back to that original question that so often seems to be skipped over is, should we be using AI at all, right? Is to reject the techno-solutionist approach of saying, well, we have AI, how can we use it responsibly? How can we use it? Because that's getting the question backwards. It should be, what are the actual needs of people and of our communities? And are those needs best served by AI? And oftentimes, I think we've seen a lot of evidence by this point, the answer is no. So from that perspective, I also started thinking of there are huge issues of consent that seem to be glided over, I think, partly as a result of just the digital economy. Generally speaking, we've kind of been inured to all of the minor consent violations that we have to go through every day in terms of like privacy, how our data is used, biometric surveillance, and things like that. And then how that plays out and gets exacerbated in the context of AI and Gen AI in particular. And then as a way of responding to that, I looked at how are people refusing and just basically saying, no, we don't want this. It's not, we know it's not good for us. And so what are they doing in response? It's kind of a way forward. So in terms of an overview, I guess it would have been helpful to have this up front. I'm going to start with just defining what do we actually mean by AI and how AI is not just a tool, but as many others have pointed out, an ideological and political project to achieve certain political goals, i.e. the concentration and accumulation of power. Then I'm going to look at what does consent actually mean. And I am a lawyer and a Canadian lawyer, so it is going to be heavily relying on Canadian law. Then I'm going to take us through a non-exhaustive list of examples of how it looked at from a certain perspective. It does seem like the project to push AI is violations of consent in one way or another all the way down. And so I go through the different ways that can happen. And again, it's not a complete list. There may be other things I haven't thought of. Then I go into the concept of generative refusal and the right to refuse, which some scholars have talked about in really interesting ways. And then finally closing with some examples of, again, how people are actually refusing AI in practice. So in terms of terminology, the term artificial intelligence has done so much work. I'm sure a lot of people on this call may already be familiar with this idea. But we say that it's a marketing term, but I only found out recently that it actually originated as a marketing term. It was from the Ghost in the Machine documentary that there's been some buzz about, but it wasn't ever a scientific term of art or anything. It was a phrase coined for a conference to attract funding and to distinguish something to talk about this computer studies that wasn't the term cybernetics, which was the term used at the time. So its origin story was as a marketing term. Now it's used to refer to everything from chatbots to machine learning algorithms to LLMs that are used in research projects that are not necessarily chatbots. And I really love thinking of it as a moving target. My favorite description of AI and kind of demystifying it is by Dr. Maura Grossman at the University of Waterloo. And she said that we only consider it artificial intelligence when it's new, because we think of it in relation to what is normal for a human to do at the time. But once we get used to it, then it's just software. And so that helps to cut through the mystique of it. And now it is mostly just used as a buzzword. And so people like Astra Taylor and Ali Al-Khatib have talked about how AI is not just technology, but it's the idea of AI and the fact that we need to be pursuing it and adopting it to the maximum extent possible is an ideological and political project to rearrange power. So as Astra Taylor says, to wield against poor and working people, as Ali says, to centralize structure upwards and among smaller, more dominant groups of people. And then finally, I wanted to add this idea from Edward Entwistle Jr. of the Silicon Valley consensus, which is kind of speaks to the idea of an AI industrial complex, where it's a convergence of profit-seeking actors, businesses, working in conjunction with political actors who have all decided to overbuild, overinvest, overhype this one particular technology, in this case AI, or what they call AI. But that's almost just the end, the means to an end. And that end is to continue raising as much venture capital as they can and then use that extreme wealth in order to reshape society to the political ends that they have decided they want to achieve through this massive wielding of wealth. Okay, so with that understanding of AI and what it does, we now will move on to what exactly does consent mean. So here are just some examples, again, rooted in Canadian law. And I should say that this is not to say, because obviously people immediately get into dicey places when you try to apply legal standards to like everyday social situations. And so that's not what we're doing here, or what I think we should necessarily do, but it's just to ground our understanding of consent. And here is what people who have thought deeply about consent and what it should mean in cases when it really matters have decided what needs to be involved for the consent to be valid. So when it comes to sexual assault law, for instance, it has to be direct, as in not indirect, so like explicit, informed, personal, as in you have to personally give it. It can't be somebody else giving it the consent on your behalf. Contemporaneous at the time it happens. Voluntary, which includes being mentally competent and conscious at the time. And the one I think that's overlooked a lot is revocable. You have to be able to take back the consent even if you've already given it. Similarly, with medical treatment, we see similar themes of voluntary, informed. They have to be able to have enough information to make a decision. In Canadian federal privacy law, consent is valid if the individual understands the nature, purpose, and consequences of disclosing or their data, personal data being collected. And so I think we can see it by comparison to this understanding of consent, how kind of anemic our approach to and understanding of consent is in the context of data privacy and digital privacy. First, when it came to social media platforms and kind of getting used to just like going through the motions of clicking the cookies banners or the terms of service and things like that. And then now, even more so when it comes to LLMs, because we may not even get the opportunity to give or withhold consent in the first place, right? When you think about, well, we'll get into it later in terms of like biometrics data, face, photo scraping and things like that. And then so taking that further into the tech law and policy context, Evan Salinger and Woody Hartzog have actually suggested that under a more robust understanding of consent, things such as facial recognition surveillance is not something that's actually consentable to, because of the excessive harms that it would result, and because people cannot be considered truly informed of all of the consequences that could result from it. We have a similar concept in our federal privacy law, where our federal privacy commissioner has set up a series of activities that they call no-go zones, where they say even if it is still, because there are just some things that we should not, as a society, allow people to waive the right to consent to. And then also people such as Jasmine McNeely and Jane Bailey at U Ottawa are working on the concept of how do we reshape or rethink consent. Jane's project is called Rethinking Consent at University of Ottawa, to take account of these dynamics, because the answer can't be like some governments have been saying, oh, well, we just won't need consent, that we will allow companies to not require consent and say if they have legitimate business interests, and that's kind of a way around it. But that is a way that accommodates these new business models. And maybe the answer is that the business models shouldn't actually be accommodated in the first place. They should just be shut down if there isn't a way that they can be consented to that still preserves a free and open democratic society. So with that understanding of consent, what are the different ways that the AI project, I mean, as in like the ideological and political pursuit of widespread AI everywhere, how does it actually rely on violations of consent? What are all the different ways in terms of like the AI supply chain and how it's both created and deployed on people? So first, there's, I think the first thing most people here would think of is sexual violation of consent with non-consensual intimate imagery, sexualized AI deepfakes, image-based abuse. Here's just some examples from Grok, for example. And this is why actually I would say that the sexual assault law is relevant, right? Because it does implicate the same interests of sexual integrity and bodily autonomy. You also have the people pointing out here that non-consensual sexual image-based abuse is the feature, not the but when it comes to a lot of these people. So they're saying, oh, you can do a rom-com with Marilyn Monroe, but it's like, okay, well, what if it's not a rom-com? What if it's a pornographic video and it's not Marilyn Monroe, which already there's so many implications there, but a currently living actress, and you are basically selling the idea of, oh, you can generate non-consensual porn of this living actress without her consent. And then you also have here what I would suggest is the erosion of consent when it comes to dealing with live humans, because you are getting used to having to deal with someone that registers to you as a person, even if they're not, who does not have their own opinions, who is constantly agreeable, where there's no relational friction whatsoever. And so what happens if someone that becomes used to interacting with someone that way, and then they run into someone who is none of those things because they are a real human? There is non-sexual bodily violations, which is i.e. biometrics data. So our voice, our fingerprints, our faces, our gaits, our emotions, our heartbeats, all these things are being taken often without consent or in ways where the consent can't be considered to be truly valid. Then when it comes to the development of AI, you have violation of material and environmental consent, as well as that of indigenous sovereignty, because as my colleague Jeff Doctor is constantly asking, on whose land are all of these data centers being built? So we already have examples in Canada of a First Nation saying that AI data center was announced for their land and they weren't consulted. They found out when the public found out. Similarly, in the US, a lot of historically marginalized communities, particularly lower income and Black communities that are already subjected to decades of environmental racism, that is now being compounded by their areas being targeted for data centers as well. And again, they're not consenting to any of this happening, but they're the ones paying the repercussions. Of course, I think you're familiar with intellectual creative theft of people's work undergirding the creation of LMs. And then there's what I called organizational violations of consent in labor and education, where I think earlier this week, a bill was announced that they're going to make AI literacy a compulsory part of K-12 education. So, and then also how employers are now forcing their employees to use AI, incorporating it into their performance reviews or as a job requirement. And so it's that sense of, okay, well, if you're not going to voluntarily take it up, we are just going to force you to take it up anyway. Finally, there's what I suggested is the violation of the consent of the governed, because they themselves are saying that we see this as a tool of political power. So you have Alex Karp, the Palantir CEO, saying like our technology will reduce the political power of educated female voters for most Democrats. You have Peter Thiel more than 10 years ago, saying like it's so inconvenient to convince people to vote for us and to agree with us. We can just use technology to override their will, basically. And then Blair, I know, who was a speaker earlier in the series, wrote a great article about our own government's consultation on AI, where they just ran roughshod over all of civil society. It was a super rush process. It was entirely staffed with industry folks. And then they used AI to process all of the submissions. So they didn't even read the submissions that people did rush to submit. So that again, it's like you're not governing then, and you're not actually listening to the people that you claim whose trust you want to gain. So in response, people have started talking about how to refuse AI and the gender refusal. So many people have written about this, but I was really struck in particular by Audra Simpson's discussion of refusal in the context of Indigenous resistance to state power. So her paper was in the context of US and Australia, applies to Canada and other states as well, where for them, it's to the core of everything, because in many ways, the continued existence of Indigenous people is itself a refusal of the historical state dispossession of their lands and sovereignty, where the state is saying, like, this is not your land anymore, it's our land. These are not your laws because you live in our country. These are not your borders. And also you shouldn't be here anymore because we tried to commit genocide. And so the fact that they're still here is in and of itself the refusal. And so by outwardly rejecting the framing and default assumptions that are presented to you, you open up a new avenue of assumptions, frameworks, and ways to see things. And this is something that in the data science context, Chelsea Barbaz and her co-authors have recognized as well, that once you say no to something, that opens up 1,000 other paths to which you can actually say yes. And so some examples of what people have done is Olivia Guest and her colleagues have done an open letter from educators, refuse the call. Writing faculty, I think recently an association of writers and compositions, I think, passed a resolution maintaining the right to refuse AI. And then, of course, a lot of data center pushback has been in the news recently. So just to end, I think I would pose the question of, the more I read about this, the more I started thinking, okay, so it is really important to retain the right to refuse AI. There's another paper I didn't include in here, but it was a really almost touching paper, actually, that advocated for how senior citizens should be provided with the right to refuse newer technologies, whether that's AI. And the interesting point from that paper was that it shouldn't be a negative right, where it's like, okay, we won't force you to do it, but it should be a positive right, where we will actually set up the systems that will make it so your life is not made harder by opting out of this technology. And they actually analogized it to how in some places there are laws against entirely cashless systems, because going cashless is really exclusionary for a lot of people. And so the positive right means we will still make it equally easy and convenient for you to pay in cash as for you to pay with, credit card or Apple Pay or whatever. So this paper was saying the same thing should be done for people who decide to opt out of AI. And right, so I was saying, so given all of that and what we know, the question may move from how do we retain a right to refuse AI to, do we actually at some point have to think about a duty to refuse if we are truly committed to things like human rights, social justice, and equality, and knowing what the potential repercussions of this technology is in the world that we have today as it is set up. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia, for such a thought-provoking presentation. Now we can move to Ploi's presentation, then we have like the Q&A afterwards, if that's okay. Thank you. Ploi.
Hello, hello. I'm not going to move my screen into presentation mode because the only person that I can see their face is Cynthia. But it's helpful for me to see even Cynthia's face. Thank you for the talk, Cynthia. I think this talk, we did not coordinate this, but follows on your talk nicely. So if Cynthia was talking about the politics of refusal and how saying no opens up new pathways for engagement, I'm interested in the nuanced middle ground between an emphatic yes and a hard no, because usually in practice, that's where I find myself ending up, is like yes in this instance, no in this instance, and what is the nuance of that answer? I have 15 minutes, so real quick introduction. I'm Ploi, American, hence the accent, but been in the UK for the last 10 years. The name is Thai, so I was born in Thailand. Yeah, and I've been doing this work for the last 7 years. Time. Yeah, so I'm a applied AI researcher, educator, and organizer. I'm the co-founder of AIxDesign here. And I wanted to share a bit about my perspective and position before I go into things. I think the space that I operate in is something that doesn't yet have a formal name, as with a lot of like subculture-y things or grassroots things, but it goes by 100 names. So whether you call it indie AI, like independent AI, or slow AI, or lo-fi AI, or community AI, or pro-worker AI, pro-artist AI, there is a whole sea of work that's happening in counter to what I call commercial AI. And so a lot of the stuff that Cynthia was talking about, I would call commercial AI. So AI that's deployed by the big tech companies, right? And I think in our work, it's really helpful, for me, it's really helpful to understand the materiality of the technology, like what's the math behind this machine learning? What's the science? If you know that an LLM is a next token predictor, then you might not use it, for instance, to do a Google search. So there's like some ways of interacting with AI, I think, that become more nuanced when you understand like the nuts and bolts of it. What is the math behind it? What is it like technically trying to do? And then there's also like the culture behind it, right? So you understand the politics and the culture in the ways that this came to be, the decisions that were made in the product pipeline to launch ChatGPT, And the reason I think these are important is because if you can parse out what's inherently true to the technology versus what are the commercial decisions that were made along the way to make this commercial product, then perhaps we can like begin to find in the seams something that is made by communities for communities. The question is still open, right? I'm not saying that there absolutely is, but I think it's worth asking the question: is there AI that can serve communities well, can serve artists well, can serve workers well? So here's some things that drive the work. This is Namjoon Pak, incredible artist, and he said, "I use technology in order to hate it properly." I'm super interested in specific critiques about what AI is bad at, and also really specific hopes and dreams of what AI is good at and what it might be used for. But I think the more specific we can get, the quicker we can get into like, oh, the interesting bit in the middle. Also inspired by Ruhad Benjamin. So it's really important to critique what we see. There's incredible work being done documenting all of the harms, all of the ways in which it ladders up to existing legislation, what new regulation can we put into place, all of that super important work, especially in like systems change. There's a bunch of roles to play. And I think it's really important to, in my work, also maybe because I'm not a proper capital A academic, I'm really interested in crafting what the new worlds that might exist, right? Let's dismantle the ones that we can't live within as we build these new ones. Let's make them the alternatives. And this third thing, which is something that we say at AIxD a lot, is no one knows where AI is going, but we're not willing to leave it up to these guys. And like, these are the people that I'm willing to leave AI up to, right? So this is like a screen recording of a small AI conversation. And these are the types of people who I know are working in AI. And so there's a bunch of unlearning, I feel, from mainstream narratives of who's making AI and what AI is or isn't. In my world, it's a bunch of women, non-binary folks, people of color, queer, all like thinking about how their existence might live in the seams in this like really computational world. How could they show up? How does it break? What new things can we make? And so I'm going to go really quickly into showing two examples of the work. And as a group, just to backtrack, AIxD is a nonprofit organization. It's registered in the Netherlands, a stichting. We are perhaps accidentally, so it's co-founded by me and Nadia Pete. We're run by women, always have been. There have absolutely been men in the group. But I think, our audience, we have like 20,000, 25,000 audience members. So like across different channels, and a majority of those are women. And I think that's an interesting point because it seems now that that AI is becoming more of a mainstream conversation. That seems to be like a really important marketing point for folks who want to partner with us, that they find it really difficult to talk to folks who aren't white men, techies, folks who are mathematicians. And somehow we've coalesced this group of designers, artists, community organizers, activists, advocates who are interested in practically critiquing the technologies. So that's just some background on AIxD. But we think that Silicon Valley's most powerful monopoly might be how we perceive technology. And Cynthia brought up that AI has always been a marketing term. There's also a great book, so that documentary that's just come out is amazing. There's a great book called The AI Con by Emily Bender and Dr. Alex Hanna that goes through the AI tropes. So there's three buckets that our work exists in. The work that I've been doing over the past 7 years, which is we're really interested in dismantling these like mainstream narratives of AI, all these tropes, right? It's godlike, it's sentient, it's omniscient, it's super scientific and knows everything, or it's magic. Let's like understand what these linguistic shortcuts helps us do, and also how it shackles our imagination, not only our imagination for what's possible, but also the language of our critiques. And I think this is related to the Ruha Benjamin quote. It's not enough to just dismantle what we don't like about the existing narratives. It's really important that we reimagine new ones. And so I'll go into a project called Archival Images of AI that shows exactly how we do this for folks who are not in school, as young as 5 years old as 75 years old, and how we can all what are the conditions in which folks who don't normally feel invited to these conversations can voice their opinions about how this really ubiquitous marketing term, AI, and the technologies that exist within this umbrella, how can they feel like they have a voice in this because their voices are aggressively valid? And then the third part is to like make it all real. And there's a few ways that we make this real. One, through like literally making AI models that show these different worldviews or for these very specific use cases. But it could also be something like the work that we've done with Better Images of AI. So this is a Google search of artificial intelligence and what it looks like in visual language. And it's, pretty homogenous. You can go through, actually, you can look at betterimagesofai.org, a longtime partner of ours, also a nonprofit. They're a stock image library based in the UK, but they have great papers about visual tropes and how these support unhelpful understandings of what AI is and isn't. So if you have a need for a better image of AI, go check them out. And this is some examples of our work. We worked with them now for three years. It's a forever project, if we're going to be honest. And so the work with Better Images of AI looks at how we can add more nuance, add more accurate nuance to the conversation. AI isn't blue brains or a white humanoid robots. It's not the like creation moment, this. It's things like this, right? The confusion of figuring out what is or isn't a crosswalk. And so this is work with Anne and Luke, who make amazing collages. You can have a look on Better Images of AI. But in their work, we commissioned these artists in the first season of working with Better Images of AI to make, better images of AI. So this is around like data labeling, data labor, the complexity of data. Is it a reflection of us? I argue yes and no, but to show them the messier reality behind it all. This is some work with Khoo, who is, anyways, an illustrator. But building off of, I'm sure you guys have seen this Anatomy of an AI system, black and white. I believe it was with Kate Crawford. Anyways, totally accurate, this mapping, but does it show like the messy realities and how it connects to like mining and the materiality of it all? And so Clairot has done this great triptych. And then we went to a second season where it took like 6 months to make 11 images with commissioned artists. That's totally a dent. That's doing great work, but the problem's really big. So how can we get other folks to feel empowered to make their own better images of AI? So we then went on, AIxD is like aggressively participatory. It's the only way we know how to research, because what I know is what I know, but what we together know is so much stronger and richer. So we're always looking to the public, our communities, to figure this out. So we went down this project with Netherlands Institute for Sound and Vision to look at how we might remix public domain images, so consentful images, to tell better stories about AI. These are some images by Hannah Baraka around like the feminine labor, the craft work behind the early microchips, around the hardware that fuels AI. You can see there's a great talk, I think, on YouTube. We published to YouTube that she did at a festival that we hosted last year around this. And so we went through, making better images of AI through public domain images. These are also all published to betterimagesofai.org. But there's different ways in which you can now see that you can make an image of AI that isn't just a blue brain. So it's collaging. Here's a playbook that we published. We've run it, so many times now, 20 something times. There's been hundreds of participants. And you can see like a gallery of all of these retold stories about AI. I can send this link later. But for us, this serves as like the foundation for what we might make. So if you can't articulate the types of futures that you want, not even AI futures, but like what types of futures do you want to see, then it's really difficult to make a technical brief to build towards that future. So this work of like articulating what you're like pulling out of your brain what your imagination thinks, what your critiques are, and then crafting, collaging this world with pen, paper, scissors, tape. This is the start of then how we might make super small AI that works for us, that's specifically designed for our needs. Small AI comes from a project that started 3 years ago. You can read, we published 3 reports on it. So in 2022, there was a question about this thing called slow AI, which felt akin to like slow food, slow fashion, indirect contrast to fast fashion, fast food. Is there a way that we could build AI that are rooted and grounded and local? So we went on this 18-month research project. And there were 3 streams. One, ancestral AI, which ended up being a look at how for millennia we've been collecting data about things, and how might we learn how data was collected in the past to inform how we collect data now, and how is that different to commercial data collection, which feels like decontextualized, hyper generic. There's great stuff in there. There's also esoteric AI, which is looking at predictive practices of the past. We've been trying to, with data collection, predict the uncertain futures for millennia. So what can we learn in the design of the UX of AI that might lean into this more sincere chicanery? David Benkei mentioned that in a talk that he had that I thought was really brilliant. How might we show that there is co-creation of meaning behind these patterns? So that's esoteric AI. And then there's a third called small AI. And the question of small AI was this question, which is what becomes possible when our objective is cultural creation and preservation instead of scale or profit? What if we made AI to be small, weird, and situated? It sounds like an art project. To be honest, some of it has started as an art project, but there's really interesting implications for how we might roll out bigger AI systems that are consentful, that are contextualized, that are community governed. And so this is the team for the small AI project. This is Nadia Nadesan, who served as our research lead. Gabriela Garcia was one of the founders of Hacking Hustling. If you guys haven't heard of them, they were an incredible sex worker tech research group, advocacy group that made some amazing reports. And with Arnab Chakravarti here, we went on to see the question that Gabriela had. So she was our commissioned artist. So each of these projects had a report written by the research lead. We also made an artist commission because there's only so much that language can capture. And if we're exploring the seams, what can we do in something less strict than language? It could be this art project. So Gabriela and Arnab were our artist commission for small AI. And Gabriela's frustration / question was, she's a sex work researcher and advocate. She's published a bunch of peer-reviewed works. And she always gets asked the same questions that are really frustrating to answer. So how could she offer a small AI tool that references only her peer-reviewed work, right? Her and her community would validate the training data from which this AI tool would get its answers from. Could we build something like that? And that was the question that we went down. We had a bunch of show and tells with folks making their own small AI. And again, this is like where the litany of words comes into play. Lo-fi AI, pro artist AI, lo-fi AI. Did I already say that? Anyways. What ended up happening was because there's a time box project, we weren't able to get the consent that we wanted to get, that Gabriella set out from the start. If we can't get every author's explicit consent, we won't use this data set for training. And because of the tight time frame that we had, we weren't able to do that. So we didn't build the thing. But what we did do is build a workshop, teaching folks how to build their own small language model. It has since evolved into building your own locally run RAG, and I can like go into what that means technically in Q&A if you guys are interested. But in short, it's been like 200 folks that we have come through the workshops and have built tiny AI tools that do really specific, silly, or like community related things that commercial AI tools can't. So this is Vera Vandenberg's work. She's interested in computer vision as a reflective tool. She's interested in AI in general as a reflective tool. I'm pretty sure she's just gotten her PhD dissertation approved. She's brilliant about using AI as a reflective tool in creative professions. So this work is like a subjective computer vision. And so it's a great way of learning what AI is and isn't, and like the nuts and bolts of it is training up a computer to see the world the way you want it to see, and then deploying it onto the world. So you can see there's like nonsensical labels, but you can begin to see where, bias might creep in, how things might be unintentionally labeled and might be then deployed into like harmful situations. We're actually running this with high school students in New York City, teaching them this critical AI literacy in June. Happy to send you guys more information, or like the summary recap afterwards, after it happens. We're doing that with Rhizome. And Bika here, this is like a solar powered, locally run AI model. Computational Mama check out her work. This is another example of a small AI, DIY AI, running on solar power. No data centers involved because it's all on this computer. Now the data centers were anyways, we can get into the details of this, but like the day-to-day running of this thing is that Chain. If for folks who aren't in the UK or in Europe, Chain is a gender-based violence advocacy group. They've built their own AI tool to help take down non-consensual images on the internet because commercial AI tools just don't cut it. And this is an interesting use case, which relates to Gabriella's use case, which also relates to another use case from a colleague, a peer who runs a childhood sexual abuse advocacy group. And called Secrets Worth Sharing. And the conversation with Secrets Worth Sharing is that there's 3 years ago, there's all these like productivity promises of AI tools, do twice as work in half the time. And for folks who are doing emotionally difficult work anyways, this promise isn't for them. Because if you're working in spicy topics, anything queer, anything, to be honest, like refugee related, anything immigration related, anything non-normative, then these tools often box you out because you're going into guardrailed territories. I'm not saying that these commercial tools shouldn't be guardrailed, but is there an opportunity for us to build our own AI tools that serve our communities? So check out Survivor AI. And this is another example, forensic architecture. I keep calling everyone brilliant, but they are. Forensic architecture is a great group. They use emerging tech to map out perhaps counter narratives to mainstream narratives. They do investigations of stuff, usually against, they usually investigate like state news. Did something happen? Was the shot that was fired from the person that the state says that they were fired from? They've made a AI model to recognize tear gas canisters in different forms so that they can, in their investigations and videos they find on social media, prove that a gas canister from this manufacturer was used in this protest or riot, and then, make larger claims or counter narratives with that evidence. Those are some examples of indie AI, DIY AI. I'm going to stop there. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Ploy. This was awesome as well. And I really like how the two presentations, like they uh, talk with each other and like build on what has been said by Cynthia. And I think some of the questions that we have, and I already saw like some from the audience, they might be like useful for both of you. But first, I'll use my privilege as a moderator to ask two questions. For Cynthia, I really appreciate that you brought like the Canadian examples, because the US usually sets the bar so low that like we look at Canada internationally and think like, oh, Canada is doing everything like super well. And we know that's not the case. And so thinking about like the right to refusal of AI, like what would like meaningful public participation in kind of shaping this right of refusal would look like in Canada, beyond just like the public consultations that we know are not like working very well in the country, not only in Canada and other places, but like especially in Canada. And like, is it possible, like based on your work and your experience, to give communities real decision-making power over AI deployment? And for Ploy, like my first question would be about like to do all this amazing work, like what is needed? Because I know we have lots of people from like civil society organizations in the audience. And if we are going to build all these alternatives, like what is needed in terms of structure, resources, like funding, networks, like how do you do this kind of work, like in case someone wants to like start doing this in their own communities, for example. So please, thanks again.
Should I start? Oh, okay. Sure. Thanks for the question. So in terms of how we can equip communities to refuse, I think, well, so it's funny, I was just thinking that I actually forgot to mention during my presentation that when we criticized the government's consultation, we didn't stop there. We actually launched our own consultation in response to that. And that ended up being as generative as we had hoped, I think, because so we didn't want to say just this is a crappy consultation. It was kind of almost showing them up like this is how it should be done, and we are just going to do it. Like a ragtag team of academics and civil society advocates and people ran on no budget, ran a national consultation that in some ways arguably was better than like the actual governments because we provided resources, reading list, and I think the thing that really elevated it though is that we restored some of the autonomy back to the communities themselves. Partly it was delegatory on our parts where we were so strapped for capacity. And so we wanted to just be a conduit. Like you give us your submissions, we will email them to the government. But my colleague, Fenwick McKelvey at Concordia, he had the inspired idea to say that we should also give people resources to run their own mini consultations if they want to work in a group and not just, write a 30-page thing on their own at their behind their computer. So we set up he called it a local facilitation guide that basically laid out step by step. Like if you want to gather 3 to 5 friends or do this with your coworkers or your baseball team or your classmates or whatever, here is the map. Like spend half an hour doing this. Here's your icebreaker. Here are your discussion questions. You'll need some sticky notes. And then we had people actually do them. I think we had 10 or 12 people across the country host these, and without any it worked because we also only found out about them in the wild. We weren't involved at all, which was amazing. And then they ended up having all of these discussions in their actual communities that wouldn't have happened if we hadn't basically been said no to the Canadian government and stood for that consultation. So that was one thing, is that I think encouraging people to work in groups, because one of the papers I read, so sorry, I don't remember who wrote it, but they made the point that at some point, even though, of course, individually we can refuse, but at some point refusal also has to be collective to be effective. And so I think one is making people aware of what they can do locally, as a form of empowerment and awareness if they aren't able to feed into kind of broader, higher level schemes. The other, though, is giving them the resources. So I think a lot of what people did wouldn't have happened if we hadn't posted like the reading list and we posted submission templates and these guides, so that we made it as easy for people to do as possible if they were starting from zero and like not already AI experts. And then the other thing is, I think that education piece, and Ploy referred to this too, is breaking through all of the narratives and tropes and misconceptions about AI so they actually understand. And I see one of the questions about AI literacy. And to me, AI literacy does not mean knowing how to use AI, although that can certainly be part of it. It's actually understanding, I think Ploy said this too, how AI works, including the fact that AI itself doesn't actually refer to anything. Like throughout this whole talk, we've been referring to AI as like a general umbrella term, but this discussion could be very different if we were talking specifically about facial recognition versus hiring tools versus like paper writing tools versus therapy chatbots. All of these things could count as AI. And so making people understand too that like the ideological, political, and conceptual, almost philosophical aspects of AI and the limitations of the tech, I think, is also part of AI literacy. And then only then will they have um, the education. So there's like that education awareness gap that I think has to be filled as well.
I'm going to be honest, Jess, I don't remember what your question was to me, but that was a great answer, Cynthia.
Thanks, Cynthia. About what is needed to do the work that we do, like in case like people want to like are inspired by your like talk, and also like to understand what is needed to resist and kind of like reinvent AI in terms of resources, structures, policies, whatever is helpful in this case.
Yeah, so I completely agree with Cynthia. So much of the impactfulness of our work has been in the documentation of the work. So I think, like Cynthia, you mentioned, the allowing communities to host their own forums to talk about these things by giving them these tools and resources was really helpful, and it was surprising, to see folks running it on their own. 100%. That's been. I think a lot of folks worry about like the perfectionism of publishing, and publishing things that aren't yet done. So we work on Notion, we work on Miro, and we have what we call compost, a research compost heap. It's all of the things that came up in research that never made it to the final thing, and we publish all of it. Because if we're not funded to research this question, then somebody else, it might be a shortcut to somebody else getting something else, to getting some funding to do the research themselves. Also, it weirdly serves as documentation, right, for future funding applications, that this question has been asked before in this context. And so like so much the meta work behind, sorry, it's so weird that Meta is a company name. The like bigger work behind AIxD and like is been sort of like market making, or like it's publishing all of this stuff so that it's easily referenceable, so that when somebody says, I think there's another way we can do it, there's all of these hyperlinks or researchers that you could hyperlink to prove to your funding agency, your department head, hey, this is a conversation that's actively happening. I think we should do something about it. And 7 years in, really happy to report that we're seeing so much more funding themes, or within the funding guidelines, these conversations about like hyper small, super situated, make your own data set, have a layman's explanation workshop to how language models work or computer vision tools. And so, yeah, actually, I was to show my homework with this, I was just going to share my screen, if that was okay. Because this conversation of AI literacy is literally something, I was talking to Jess about this. So I think we're going to publish something, publish is a strong term, but figuring out what is this like AI literacy thing. And this is like the behind the scenes of this. I know this is going online. But to Cynthia's point, there's like knowing, so this is a really terrible diagram, but this is, the messy thoughts. if you like understand the science behind the tech, which is number one, it might change the way that you use off the shelf tools, which is number two, right? And you don't really need to know anything that's like to use number two tools. But then you have this three, which is like understanding the politics and the cultural relationship between like the folks who are making this technology and their relationship towards you. And if you know one and three, then maybe you make your own, which is four. But it also might help you use commercial tools in different ways, which is like what we see so much of when we hear people ask like, oh, what was your prompt? What was your system prompt for this? Or like, can you give us your prompt hack for this other thing? The ways that you use commercial tools are also informed by the ways that you understand how the technology was built. So like, yeah, this is like a work in progress mirror board of this framework that might be built. And like, it might look something like Montessori tools, or it might look something like rizographs, where like each of these layers create a different image. And this is the different levels of literacy. But yeah, this is just some behind the scenes stuff as we think about literacy.
Thank you. Now, like moving on to like some of the questions from the audience. Actually, we have like a request from Lucia. Like Lucia is teaching an undergrad course on critical literacies of AI, and is focused on not only critiquing but also resisting and reimagining. And if you could please share your resource, so like feel free to share in the chat like links to your work, paper, platforms, whatever you want to share with the audience. I think they would be very grateful for that. Thanks, Lucia. And then a question, I think like it can be like both of you. I'm curious from Yao Yu. I'm curious about your thoughts on at the community level, understanding the AI literacy, broadly defined, including resistance as a socially constructed concept in comparison to a technical skill. So I think like if you both of you, like Cynthia, do you have any thoughts on that? And then Ploy? You're muted.
Sorry, I was just saying I was in the middle of responding to Lucia, so I'm just going to take a moment.
Okay. Okay, Ploy, do you have any thoughts you want to share?
Yeah, so I'm sharing stuff in chat. I can also share it with the organizers for them to share afterwards. There's like I have a whole arena board of incredible experimental pedagogy projects around this. I think AI is so I think the reason that I'm even interested in AI, again, the umbrella term because it's a marketing term, is because AI touches it. AI is now becoming is a way of talking about everything I find interesting, which is like all of these social dynamics, social power dynamics. It's a power conversation. So if you wanted to research labor, if you wanted to research creative labor, if you wanted to talk about mining, if you wanted to talk about the de-intellectualization of like pop culture, I don't know, you can like frame this in an AI conversation in some way. So like for me, all of the research relates back into some sort of social relationship we have with each other, but also with power. There are I've sent one AI pedagogy project, which includes nice learning activities, lesson plans that address these hierarchical relationships in the context of AI. But then also the archival images of AI playbook, which is in the deck, also talks about it. Partially, it talks about, when we talk about consent and consentful images, we went down this route of public domain images or digital heritage collections, images that we already have consent to use. And then it brought up this other point, right? So part of the challenge of the images of history that have been digitized are that it's a lot of colonial perspectives that are embedded within this, right? So you're trying to like create new images of AI, perhaps do a critique of like the digital colonialism that's happening while using colonial paintings. So you have this like, you're asking the question over and over again in different instances. And so, the conversation around like AI literacy is inherently connected to our critical literacy of our own histories, of technologies of progress, who has legitimate knowledge and illegitimate knowledge. Yeah, it's a can of worms.
Thank you. We can we can move to another one and come back. If Cynthia wants to comment on that. I'll have to translate this one for just a second. Like two questions, one for each of you. It's like thanks from Mileni Gonzaga. Like thanks so much for the presentations. I would like to know about like the first Cynthia specifically about this project to refuse AI. If you think of any like governance mechanism that would guarantee like the ethical use of AI by like science or the government, the arts, etc. And for Ploy, if your like group, like your team is thinking about the like toxic relationships in relation to the territory of exploitation of like minerals and resources to make AI function and work, like data centers that you all mentioned. And what do you think that could be like a way to rethink the uses of these modes of production of AI in the world? Thank you. I can help more if needed. I did my best. Sorry, Lynn, if I didn't do a good work here.
Okay, so actually, I think this kind of ties into the AI literacy question as well, because I would say, yeah, it absolutely is a socially constructed concept. I think the idea of AI literacy does so much rhetorical work because it makes you feel like it's something you need to have. It makes it seem that it's as important as literacy, as like text literacy, right? Or like digital literacy or tech literacy, and I guess like Web 1.0, Web 2.0. Oh, and so it's the immediate feeling of if you don't understand this, you are behind. But of course, it's that narrow construction of AI literacy, right? It's about how to use AI, not how to understand AI and its impacts on your life and your community. And the way that people talk about it, I think, encourage that more narrow understanding of it. And then so bringing that to how we can guarantee more, I guess, like ethical use of AI, it really, I think, just the idea of slowing down would go a long way because so many of these problems come from that move fast and break things ethos, right? Which we've seen doesn't work, or as my friends like to say, is move fast and break things, and things are people and human rights and democracy. And so it's the idea that we always find out after the fact. Things are always moving too fast for us to say no to in the first place. So we've been calling for things like in the policing algorithms, context for instance, we said that there should be a consultation, like a notice and consultation before they do anything, where they just have a public consultation asking the community to provide all of their input and then decide. So it's an informed decision and then everybody knows about it. And so it just goes to that idea of not rushing and not basically steamrolling over the people who are the most harmed. There also has to be there could be like a sunset clause or a kill switch, something, so that idea of rolling things back, because it's not just refusing at the outset. There's been lots of examples of programs and pilots that have been tried and then later been rolled back or abandoned or contracts canceled or not renewed. And then it also comes to the specific context where they're each being rolled out. So in the workplace, for example, that might not necessarily be a government regulation thing, that might be a unionization thing. Because a lot of these issues, I think, and this is kind of pretty much all the tech issues I've worked on, AI or not, is that at some point, the issue becomes not about the tech. It becomes just about like, plain old sexism, classism, labor issues. And so if we had stronger laws about gender-based violence, or if we had stronger labor laws in the first place, then a lot of these tech issues could be mitigated. It's just tech exacerbates and then compounds the weak legal protections we have for all of these issues at all of these communities in the first place. So I'm not sure if that really answered the question, because I know I looked into like stalkerware once to see if there was a way the law could actually stop the tech from being developed, and legally it seems like there isn't. Like you can't really stop someone from making something, which is probably a good thing. But it's in the deployment and the procurement that I think there's the most space for intervention. And it's funny because a lot of what Ploy was saying in terms of like small AI, slow AI, like part of me almost thought that if they had just rolled it out like it was normal software without all of the fanfare, things could have potentially gone very differently because it's so hard to separate the tech now from the entire political machine that's surrounding it.
Just to build on that, there's another great book. I'm just listing some books in chat because somebody asked about references. Another great book called The Empire of AI by Karen Howe that explains exactly all of the stupid decisions that were made that turned AI from a research project into a commercial project and like where we're at now. And it reads like a tabloid, really well evidenced. But yeah, it's those guys that are making decisions about AI. There's definitely another way. Yeah, sorry, I'm going to keep listing stuff in chat.
Thank you. Well, this is great conversation. I wish we had more time. So we also have Irene who asked a question. I'll translate it and also like maybe I have another question that is related to this one. So like, hi, Irene is mentioning that they work as a law professor and they have been like kind of forced to use AI like in the classroom. And if people are not using AI like in higher education, then you can feel like excluded. And I'm like building on that, like even here at UVA in the School of Data Science as well. Like we even have like a dedicated budget for all the faculty members to like buy AI licenses, subscribe to services. And there is like this really like enthusiasm or hype, and we saw like literature on all these words before and kind of like being forced in like in higher education as well. And that shapes the way we think, the way the students learn. It can be like a real problem. I feel like everyone who's like an instructor, a teacher, a professor dealing with any kind of like knowledge production is struggling with this kind of questions or not. So I wonder if you have any like thoughts on that for Irene. Thanks, Irene.
There's a peppering of things happening in chat. I just wanted to share in chat, there's a link to the DARE Distributed AI Research Institute. They launched Luddite Lab Worker Resource Hub. Let's share my screen real quick. I think they launched it in the last week, but it's resources for exactly this, workers to fight back. There's also like great stats from folks like MIT Tech Review that show that like 95% of AI initiatives by companies have led to 0% ROI. This doesn't immediately help you fight back in the workplace. But I think like Cynthia mentioned earlier, like this whole idea of like AI literacy. I don't know if this is like I don't know how regional this reference is, but there was a typing tool called Mavis Beacons Learns How to Type that I learned how to like type on a keyboard. And so much of the AI literacy stuff feels like that, but for AI, right? Here's how you prompt. Here's the button that you press. And blah, blah, blah. I don't think that's AI literacy. I think that's like tool tutorials. And so when we talk about, and maybe this goes back to other questions that we've had about AI literacy. AI literacy is knowing what exactly is the model or the type of model behind the thing that you're using. Maybe there's multiple models there. What are they? What were they trained on? Who decided? Who made this decision? What company is it coming from? Is it open source? So there's open source language models from like the Swiss government, for instance. Yeah, that would be what AI literacy includes. Sorry, that was me combining answers to a few questions, but I haven't checked out. Oh, look, they're using images from Better Images of AI. I haven't checked out this thing because it was only announced a couple days ago, but I'm curious to hear what you guys think.
Thank you. You're muted. Sorry.
I would know by now. Is the question what to do if you don't want to use AI, but then you're kind of excluded because like the rest of your professional community is using it? Is that the question?
Yeah, it was about like higher education and specifically in this case, but like knowledge, we can think about like knowledge production, like having AI imposed on you, and sometimes like the refusal to say no will make you like kind of excluded from the like main policies of the institution or what everyone else is doing as well.
Okay, I think I have three thoughts in response to that. The first one is I think it does make a difference of kind of how you're exercising the refusal and the point you're coming at it from. So for instance, I think it is worth it to make sure that you have, I guess, the like technical AI literacy, at least a little bit, like that you played around with it. And so it's all there's always a balance here because I know when I was first starting out, the hot topic was like social media platforms, right? And I was like a power user of social media. Like Facebook was founded maybe like the year before I started university, and so and then I was on Twitter, and so I was the one who like rolled my eyes at the people who were like, oh, social media is like so bad, and I'm gonna write regulations about it. I'm just like, but you don't even use Twitter. You don't know how it works, so how can you talk about it? And now I don't want to be that person when it comes to AI and LMs of not knowing kind of like how it works and why people do find it valuable. And so I think that I would say with that, so without like losing yourself to it, maybe set up like little tests or just enough that you can feel confident that you know what you're talking about. And then it also just kind of removes like a vector of unfair attack where someone can say, well, you don't understand the text, so you know what you're talking about. But you're like, well, no, my critique isn't because I don't understand it, it's because I actually do understand it. And then the second thing is that there is a little bit of, I think, well, maybe it's because I'm someone this is not really related to this, but one of the few people I know who's still being COVID conscious. And so to a certain extent, I've been already used to being in the space of being someone who's doing something that like not everyone else is doing from a perspective. And so you do have to take on a little bit of like, maybe this is just part of who you are now. And it is like difficult. But that is one of the, I think, unfortunate realities of being someone. And that's why I titled my talk not just like the human's guide, but like the conscientious human guide. Like if you're thinking about things and you care about people and the world and society, like I think given how things are now, things are just going to be harder for you, unfortunately, because of how it's set up. But that leads to my third recommendation, I guess, which is to find people who feel and think similarly. And I think that's what has made the biggest difference for me. And that actually was a result of generative refusal as well, so I actually lived in the States for a few years where I found the civil society and public interest and human rights civil society advocacy was honestly so much more robust in the US than Canada. This is like the one thing that I would say maybe I enjoy more in the US than Canada. And I felt that missing ever since I moved back, and my frustrations were growing, and I had so many critiques of the people immediately around me. And I was just like, I don't understand how this is like, where are all the people who are more like-minded, I can actually like be share my thoughts about all of these issues openly with. And it wasn't until I was like, okay, clearly this space isn't working. I'm just going to create my own, that I actually started finding those people or like attracting them to me because I openly was like, okay, here's what I think about it. Do you think this too? Okay, let's be friends now, or like closer colleagues or something. And that has made a huge difference. Like just having that, I guess, social support, for lack of better, because then you feel like you're no longer alone. You have like an outlet you have like moral support. And then that also will translate into, I guess, like professional support and solidarity, and also just like making you not feel like that you're the one that's like that you're Alice in Wonderland at that, or that you're like the only one who is Alice in the Wonderland, and that it's not you, it is the world, and there's like other people who are also seeing what you're seeing. And like that alone, even if like for nothing else happens, I would say goes a really long way.
That's a great point. Yes, like find your people. Unfortunately, like we're at time. We could go on like for many hours, but we won't. So I really appreciate it. I think this was like a great way to wrap up the series. And before I pass it to Yasmin, just want to say again, like thanks so much for joining us, both of you, and to everyone who has been here today and throughout this year. And just like a shout out to Amy, Jane, Maddie, and Lohan for all the backstage support and the hard work that they did to make this work, and also to my co-organizer, Yasmin Corset. So please, Yasmin.
Thank you so much. Yes. Thank you, Ploy and Cynthia. I wish have more time here to hear y'all. So thank you all for being with us throughout the whole series. I'm really certain report by the end of the year that will mirror a bit of what the main discussions, the main topics, and of course the thoughts of our speakers. We are the idea of creating the series was to give stage for people, for intellectuals, especially women, non-binary people, gender diverse people who work on these topics of technology intersecting with gender and human rights. And I'm really happy with the whole results that we were able to get after the series, now that the series is ending. And so we hope that the report actually reflects all the things that our stellar speakers throughout these 10 episodes were able to share with us. It's our responsibility now, mine and Jess, to compile everything and share this material with the world. So thank you all once again for being with us in this one more session here. Please subscribe to the GTG Lab. The series ends, but of course, the lab's work is going on. So access the recordings. We have the YouTube channel. All the sessions are going to stay there. So thank you all. Thank you for joining us today once again, and take care. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.